"It hurts, but I want more," she whispered. He said, "Sweetheart, you're stronger than a Mustang." Elena Cruz had always believed that strength lived inside a person long before the world ever saw it. She grew up on wide land where the sky seemed endless. The wind carried the smell of dust and hay, and horses ran with the same freedom children dream of. As a young girl, she learned to ride before she learned to ride a bicycle. Horses were not just animals to her. They were partners, friends, and teachers. They taught her patience, courage, and the beauty of trust. By the time she was 28, Elena was known in several small towns as one of the most gifted rodeo trainers around. People admired her calm voice, her steady hands, and her belief that every horse, no matter how wild, had a heart that wanted to connect with a human. They said she had a gift. Elena always laughed at that and replied that the horses were the ones with the real gifts. She simply listened. But one warm evening, everything changed. She was driving home after a long day at the stables. The sky had turned orange and purple, clouds glowing like soft fire. She hummed along to an old country song on the radio, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel, feeling peaceful. Life felt stable and bright. She had future plans, shows she wanted to attend, horses she wanted to train, young riders she wanted to mentor. Then, in less than a second, her life split in two. The before and the after. A truck coming from the opposite direction veered unexpectedly into her lane. She saw the headlights flash much too close. She tried to turn the steering wheel, but everything happened too fast. The sound of metal crashing, glass breaking, and the world spinning became a memory she could never fully erase. When she opened her eyes again, she was in a hospital bed. Bright lights, white walls, the steady beeping of a machine next to her, and an aching pain that seemed to travel through every part of her body. Her legs felt heavy. Her arms were stiff. Even breathing hurt. She heard voices, soft at first, saying she had survived but had serious injuries. She would need time.
A lot of time. Elena did not cry that day.
She felt too shocked to understand anything. But when the days passed and the doctors explained the full situation, reality became impossible to ignore. Her legs had been badly damaged. Walking would be difficult for a long time. Running, riding, training horses, those things were not even mentioned. Not yet. Her heart sank. She tried to move her legs and felt a deep, sharp pain. She tried again, hoping maybe the first time was a mistake, but the pain repeated itself. She closed her eyes, trying not to panic. She was a woman who spent every day in movement, in action. The idea of being still, not by choice but by limitation, felt like a cage closing around her. A physical therapist came to visit her on the third day. He was a tall man with gentle eyes and a patient smile. His name was Mark Hensley. He introduced himself in a calm voice, explaining that he would be helping her regain her strength. He said her recovery would be difficult but possible, and she would not face it alone. Elena listened politely, but inside she felt a storm of doubt. She did not feel strong. She felt broken, scared, and lost. The world she belonged to, the stables, the horses, the wind in her hair, felt like a distant dream she might never touch again. When she left the hospital weeks later, she entered physical therapy with the same mix of hope and fear. Elena was used to working hard, but this was different. This was not the strong body she knew. This was a body that felt unfamiliar, uncooperative, and weak in ways she had never experienced. The first session lasted only 15 minutes, but it felt like climbing a mountain with no air. Her body trembled with each simple movement. Even lifting her leg a few inches felt impossible. Mark stayed by her side, guiding her slowly, making sure she did not push too far too fast. But Elena hated feeling helpless. She hated the look of concern in people's eyes. She did not want to be treated like something fragile. Still, her body was in charge now, not her will. She left that first session exhausted and embarrassed by her own limitations. Over the next few weeks, therapy continued. The room smelled of medicine, sweat, and determination. Machines lined the walls. Other patients struggled with their own injuries, each fighting quiet battles. Elena tried to remind herself that she was not alone in her struggle, but some nights she sat in her room and cried silently. She missed her old life. She missed her horses. She missed feeling free. Mark noticed her frustration, though she rarely spoke about it. He adjusted the exercises when needed, encouraged her when she felt weak, and refused to let her give up even when she whispered that she had nothing left to give. He never pushed her with harshness. He pushed her with belief. Still, there were days when belief did not feel like enough. One morning, about a month after her therapy began, Elena woke up with a heaviness in her chest that felt worse than the pain in her legs. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, wondering if she would ever get back even a piece of the life she loved. Her accident had not only broken bones, it had shaken her purpose. She wondered if she was still the same person. At therapy that day, Mark guided her through a set of new exercises meant to strengthen her balance. They were harder than anything she had done before. She pushed, but her body resisted. Sweat formed on her forehead. Her legs trembled. Her breathing became shallow. She felt her limits pressing tightly around her. Halfway through the session, she lost her balance and nearly fell. Mark caught her before she hit the ground. Instead of being grateful, she felt humiliated. Tears filled her eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered, looking away. "Yes," Mark said gently but firmly, "you can." His voice was steady, not demanding. It carried a quiet confidence she wished she felt herself. She shook her head. "It hurts too much." "I know," he replied. "But pain isn't the enemy. It's a sign that your body is waking up again." She swallowed hard. His words were reasonable, but her fear was louder than reason. She stared at the floor for a long moment, feeling a stream of emotions she could not untangle. Anger, grief, nostalgia, exhaustion. Finally, she whispered something she had never admitted before. "It hurts. But I want more." The words surprised even her. They were fragile, honest, and filled with a small spark of the fire she once carried in her chest. She wanted more life, more movement, more hope. She wanted to feel strong again, even if it seemed impossible. Mark heard not just the words, but the meaning behind them. He saw a woman who had been knocked down but still held on to a piece of her own courage, even if she couldn't see it clearly. Over the next days, Elena began to notice small changes, not big victories, but tiny signs that her body was rebuilding itself. She could lift her leg a little higher. She could hold her balance a few seconds longer. She could complete a full session without feeling like she would collapse afterward. These moments were small, but they mattered. They created a thin bridge between who she was now and who she hoped she could be again. Yet recovery was not a straight line. Some days she felt progress. Other days she felt as if she had slipped back to the beginning. But each time she faltered, Mark calmly guided her forward again, reminding her that healing was not measured by perfection, but by persistence. Elena began to learn a new kind of strength, one that did not come from physical power but from patience, courage, and resilience. And though she did not fully understand it yet, her journey was only beginning. The road ahead was long, difficult, and unpredictable, but she would not walk it alone. For the first time since her accident, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could rise again, not as the person she once was, but as someone even stronger. For weeks, Elena continued her physical therapy, slowly building a routine that felt both comforting and challenging. Every morning she woke up early, sat on the edge of her bed, and took a deep breath before standing. Those first few steps always reminded her of how far she still had to go. Her legs shook, her muscles burned, and sometimes her heart felt heavier than her body. But she kept going because something inside her refused to give up completely. Therapy had become the center of her day. She would walk into the building with determination mixed with nervousness. Some days she felt strong, and some days she felt like she was carrying a mountain. But no matter how she felt, Mark greeted her with the same calm, steady energy that made the world feel a little less overwhelming. He always asked the same question, "Ready for today?" And even when she wasn't, Elena nodded. As the weeks passed, the exercises became more demanding. She moved from simple stretches to weight-bearing movements, and then to balance training that pushed her body in new ways. The therapy room felt like a controlled battlefield, one where every inch of progress had to be earned with sweat and patience. Other patients fought their own battles around her. Some were older, some younger, but all of them carried the same silent determination. One afternoon, the exercises were tougher than usual. Mark introduced a new routine designed to rebuild strength in her lower legs. It involved lifting her weight slowly, holding it, and lowering herself back down. It sounded simple, but Elena quickly discovered how much effort it required. Her legs shook, her breathing quickened, and she felt her muscles tremble under the pressure. "Take your time," Mark encouraged her. "Your body learns through repetition, not speed." She nodded, but inside she felt frustration rise. She had always been strong, physically and mentally. She once worked with horses that weighed hundreds of pounds and ran with explosive power. She knew how to handle a Mustang on its worst day, so why did her own body refuse to cooperate now? After the 10th repetition, she had to stop. Sweat rolled down her face, and her arms shook from trying to steady herself. She lowered into a sitting position and covered her face with her hands. She didn't want Mark to see the tears forming in her eyes, but she couldn't stop them. "It's too hard," she whispered. Mark sat on a small stool across from her. Not too close, not too far. He waited until she looked up before he spoke. "It's supposed to be hard," he said gently. "If it were easy, you wouldn't be rebuilding anything."
She shook her head. "It feels like I'm not getting anywhere."
"You are," he insisted. "You don't see it yet, but I do. Every single day you're stronger than the day before." Elena sighed. His words sounded encouraging, but her own doubts were louder. Sometimes it felt like she was walking through mud. Progress happened, but so slowly it was hard to recognize. She wanted big improvements, not tiny steps. She wanted to feel like her old self again. But the truth was, she wasn't the same person anymore. The accident had changed her body, yes, but it had also shaken her confidence. She wasn't sure if she wanted her old life back or if she needed to build a new one from the pieces left behind. Still, she kept going. The next day, she returned to therapy with a quiet determination. She took a deep breath before entering the room. She didn't want to disappoint herself again. Cha! When Mark approached her with the same routine, she hesitated only a moment before nodding. This time, she focused on her breathing, her posture, and every tiny movement her muscles made. It still hurt, but she understood something new. Pain did not always mean danger. Sometimes it meant growth. Halfway through the session, she steadied herself on the bars and whispered under her breath, "Just keep going." Mark overheard and smiled slightly. That's the spirit. Even with encouragement, some days were harder than others. There were days when she woke up tired before even taking her first step. Days when her legs felt like stone. Days when she questioned whether all this effort was worth it. But then something unexpected happened. About 2 months into her therapy, she was working on a machine that helped strengthen her legs. She pushed the platform forward with her feet and held it, then slowly released. She repeated the movement several times, and suddenly she realized something remarkable. Her legs didn't shake as much as they usually did. She paused, surprised. "You okay?" Mark asked. She nodded. "I think I did that without struggling." He walked over, checked her form, and smiled. "You did." For a moment, Elena felt a wave of emotion so strong she had to close her eyes. The progress was small, maybe even invisible to someone else, but to her it felt like a door opening after weeks of feeling trapped in a dark room. The next few days were filled with more small victories. She could lift her leg higher. She could balance a little longer. She could walk a few more steps without holding on to anything. These moments were like sparks, tiny flashes that reminded her she still had strength inside her. But she also faced setbacks. One morning she arrived at therapy feeling confident, but halfway through the session her legs suddenly weakened. She lost balance and almost fell. Mark caught her, but the embarrassment hit her harder than the stumble. She blinked away tears and shook her head. "I should be past this by now." "No," Mark said softly. "This is part of the process. Healing isn't a straight line. I hate feeling weak. You're not weak, he said. You're recovering. There's a difference. His words lingered with her long after the session ended. Still, the frustration stayed. That evening, when she returned home, she sat on her porch and watched the sunset. The sky glowed with soft colors, reminding her of the evenings she used to spend riding. She closed her eyes and imagined the warm breath of a horse beside her, the sound of hooves on dirt, the rhythm of a gallop. Those memories brought comfort, but also sadness. She missed that life deeply. But she also felt something else, a pull inside her, a desire to chase her strength again. Not just the physical strength, but the inner strength she had always been proud of. The girl who once connected with Mustangs, the wildest, strongest horses, still lived inside her. She just needed to find her again. The next week, Mark introduced another new exercise that required her to balance on one leg and hold the position while lifting her arms slowly. The moment he explained it, she felt intimidated. But she didn't want to refuse. She didn't want fear to guide her. She took her position, lifted one leg and raised her arms. The first few seconds were shaky. Her muscles trembled, and she nearly lost her balance. But then something shifted. Her body steadied. She held the position a little longer, then a little longer still. When she finally lowered her leg, she was breathing heavily, but she felt triumphant. Mark nodded with approval. That was excellent.
Elena felt a spark warm her chest.
It wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be perfect, he replied. It was supposed to be progress, and it was. Day by day, Elena's confidence began to grow again. She still had moments of doubt, but they didn't control her like before. She focused on the small victories instead of the distance she still had to travel. She learned to appreciate every step, every movement, every breath of strength her body offered. She also started talking more during therapy. Not about the accident. She still wasn't ready for that. But about her old life, her horses, her dreams. Mark listened with genuine interest. Sometimes he asked questions. Sometimes he simply let her talk. It felt good to remember those moments without feeling broken by them. One afternoon, while she practiced walking without support, she whispered to herself, "I'm getting there." Mark heard her and replied, "You're doing more than getting there. You're rebuilding." Elena looked at him, unsure whether she should believe him. But something in his expression, calm, steady, certain, made her think that maybe he saw a strength she couldn't see yet. As she walked across the room, slowly but steadily, she felt a quiet sense of hope. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel unreachable. It felt like something she could step into little by little, one movement at a time. And though she didn't know it yet, these small sparks of progress were beginning to shape the moment that would change everything. The moment when she would hear the words that would reignite the fire inside her completely. The turning point in Elena's recovery did not arrive like a loud crash or a dramatic moment. Instead, it began on a quiet morning that looked like any other. The sun rose slowly, casting soft light through her window. Birds chirped outside, and a warm breeze slipped into the room when she opened the curtains. Nothing about the morning suggested a life-changing moment was coming, but that was often how important days started, simple and ordinary on the outside. Elena stood up carefully, checking her balance. Her legs still felt heavy, but not as stiff as before. She stretched a little and closed her eyes, breathing in deeply. She tried to tell herself that today would be a good day, even though she had no proof. She needed hope even in small amounts. When she arrived at the therapy center, she noticed it was quieter than usual. A few patients sat in chairs waiting for their turn. The familiar scent of disinfectant and the sound of soft music filled the space. She walked slowly toward her usual area, where Mark was preparing equipment for the session. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and a gentle smile formed on his face. "Morning, Elena," he said warmly. "Ready for something a little different today?" She raised an eyebrow, half curious, half concerned. "Different how?" "You'll see," he answered, giving her a reassuring nod. "I think you're strong enough for it now." His words warmed her, but also made her nervous. Every new exercise came with uncertainty. Would she fall? Would she fail? Would her body betray her again? Still she nodded. "I trust you." He handed her a supportive walking strap and guided her toward a narrow path marked with lines on the floor. At first glance it didn't look intimidating. But Elena knew better. Simple things often carried the biggest challenges. "Today," Mark explained, "we're going to work on controlled walking. You'll take steps with me beside you, but I won't hold you unless you need it." She blinked. "You mean I'll walk on my own?" "Yes," he said gently. "You've been preparing for this for weeks." Her heart raced. Walking alone had seemed like a distant dream, something she whispered about but didn't dare believe. The fear of falling still clung to her, making her hesitate. But the part of her that wanted her life back, the part that missed feeling alive, pushed her to try. She took her first step. It was shaky, but she didn't fall. Then she took another. Her legs wobbled, and her arms flinched, ready to grab anything nearby for support. But she stayed upright. Mark walked beside her, his eyes focused, ready to step in if necessary. But he didn't touch her. He didn't need to. Her body, though trembling, was doing the work. "Good," he said softly. "Keep breathing." She took a deep breath and continued. Each step felt like lifting a heavy weight, but she kept going. She imagined the horses she once trained, their steady rhythm, their confidence. She tried to borrow a little of that courage. Halfway down the path, doubt crept in. Her legs hurt, her balance felt unstable, and her mind screamed at her to stop before she collapsed. "I can't," she whispered, fear crawling into her voice. "Yes, you can," Mark said, not raising his voice but making it strong enough that she heard him clearly. "Just one more step." She took it, then another, and another. When she finally reached the end of the path, she felt her breath catch. Her chest expanded with something she had not felt in a long time. Pride. Real, deep pride. She looked at Mark, surprised by her own success. I did it." He nodded with a warm smile. "Yes, you did." Her eyes filled with tears, but not from pain or frustration this time. These tears came from a place of hope, a place she thought she had lost forever. After a short rest, Mark introduced the next exercise. It was more challenging, requiring her to shift her weight from side to side while standing on a soft surface. It forced her muscles to work harder to keep her balanced. She nearly stumbled twice, but each time she recovered on her own. "Good reflexes," he said with a nod. "Your body is remembering how to protect itself." That idea, that her body was learning again, felt powerful. It reminded her that she wasn't broken beyond repair. She was healing, rebuilding from the inside out. Later in the session, Mark brought out a set of lightly weighted ropes. They weren't heavy, but they required careful movement. Elena looked at them skeptically. "I'm not sure I can do that," she admitted. "I wouldn't give it to you if I didn't believe you could," he replied. She wrapped her hands around the ropes and began moving them up and down. The exercise was meant to strengthen her core and improve her stability, but it felt like it demanded everything she had. Her arms shook, her breath quickened, and sweat formed on her forehead. After several minutes, she dropped the ropes and leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. "That was exhausting," she said between breaths. "That was excellent," he corrected. "Your endurance is improving." She didn't feel strong at that moment. She felt tired, worn, and drained. But she also felt something she hadn't felt in months. Alive. As the session continued, Mark guided her through stretches to cool down. Finally, he helped her sit on a bench so she could rest before going home. "You did really well today," he said. She shook her head slowly. "I almost fell. Twice." "But you didn't fall," he reminded her. "That's the point," she sighed, unsure whether to accept his praise. Then he added something unexpected. "Elena," he said softly, "I've worked with many patients over the years, and I can tell when someone is on the brink of a breakthrough." "You're getting close." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. Breakthrough? The word felt too big, too hopeful. But there was sincerity in his eyes, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe him. In the days that followed, Elena pushed herself harder. She still had moments of doubt, but something inside her had shifted. She wanted more progress. She wanted more strength. She wanted more of the feeling she had when she walked without help. But greater challenges often come before major breakthroughs. During one session, Mark introduced a difficult exercise that required her to balance on one leg while lifting the other slightly off the ground. The moment he explained it, fear tightened her chest. The pressure of failing felt heavy. Still, she tried. She lifted her leg. For a second, she balanced. Then her body swayed. She managed to steady herself for a heartbeat before her weight shifted too far. She stumbled forward, and Mark quickly caught her. "I knew it," she said bitterly. "I can't do it." He shook his head gently. "You balanced for a second? That's a start." It was barely anything. It was the beginning of something. He insisted. Frustration built inside her. She wanted to scream not at him but at the situation, at her limits, at her body for being slow to recover. She sank onto a chair and covered her face with her hands. "I'm tired of feeling weak." There was silence for a moment. Then Mark spoke in a voice full of calm strength. "Elena, look at me." She lowered her hands. "You're not weak," he said. "You're healing. Healing takes time, and courage, and endurance. And you have all of that." She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. His words held a truth she couldn't deny. Later that same day, after another attempt at the balancing exercise, something unusual happened. She managed to hold the position a bit longer, just a few seconds longer, but it felt like a victory. Mark saw it too. His eyes softened, and for the first time he spoke words she would never forget. "Sweetheart," he said in a gentle, warm tone, not romantic, not dramatic, simply human. "You're stronger than a Mustang." Elena froze. The word struck her like a spark hitting dry wood. A fire ignited inside her, not physical fire, but emotional strength, a sense of identity she thought she'd lost forever. A Mustang. Wild, powerful, resilient, impossible to break. She had spent years working with Mustangs. She admired their strength, their spirit, their refusal to give up even when frightened or hurting. Those animals taught her patience, respect, and courage. To be compared to one was the highest compliment she could ever imagine. "Stronger than a Mustang," she repeated softly, almost in disbelief. "Yes," Mark said, "because a Mustang fights instinctively. But your strength comes from choice. You choose to keep going. That makes you something rare." The words unlocked something in her heart. They reminded her of who she was before the accident, and who she still could become. In that moment, everything changed. She lifted her chin, wiped her tears, and stood up again. "Let's try one more time," she said. And she did. Elena returned home after the day Mark compared her strength to a Mustang, and something felt different inside her. It was as if a long, silent voice inside her had finally spoken again, reminding her of the person she used to be. Fearless, patient, brave, and steady like the horses she once trained. She sat on her porch that evening, watching the golden light fade across the fields, and repeated the words softly to herself. "Stronger than a Mustang." Each time she whispered it, she felt a little braver, a little steadier, a little more alive. From that day forward, her approach to therapy changed. She no longer walked into the building simply hoping to make progress. She walked in ready to earn it. Her steps were still slow, her muscles still stiff, and her body still far from healed. But her mind was different. Her heart had awakened. Pain still came, but she no longer saw it as an enemy. It became a signal, a sign that she was pushing her limits, reminding her that strength required effort. Every exercise that once felt impossible now felt like a doorway she needed to open, even if it took many tries. Mark noticed the change immediately. She no longer hesitated when he introduced new routines. She didn't ask if she was ready. She simply nodded and tried. And when she struggled, she didn't give up. Instead, she breathed deeply and reminded herself that Mustangs didn't stop running just because the ground was uneven. One morning, Mark had her practice walking across the room without support. She had done this before, but today he wanted her to walk farther, almost the entire length of the therapy hall. It was longer than anything she had attempted on her own. She stared at the path ahead, feeling both excitement and fear. "You can stop any time you need to," Mark said calmly. "But try to go as far as you can." She nodded and began walking. Her steps were slow but steady. She focused on her breathing and kept her eyes forward instead of looking at her feet. She remembered the advice she used to give young riders. Look where you want to go, not at the ground beneath you. It helped. Halfway down the hall, her legs began to tremble. Her balance wavered, but she steadied herself by tightening her core and taking a deep breath. She kept walking. Every step felt like lifting a huge weight, but she didn't stop. Mark walked beside her, silent but ready if she needed help. She could sense his presence, calm, steady, protective, but he didn't touch her. When she reached the end of the hall, she had to hold the wall to keep herself from falling. Her heart pounded, and sweat covered her forehead. But she made it. "You did it," Mark said, his voice filled with genuine pride. Elena shook her head weakly. "I almost fell, but you didn't," he reminded her, "and that's what matters." Her breathing slowed, and a smile slowly formed on her tired face. She walked all that way. She did something she couldn't even imagine doing weeks earlier. That moment wasn't just about physical strength. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of more than she believed. As days passed, she continued breaking through her fears one by one. Mark introduced new challenges every week, balancing on soft platforms, stepping sideways, lifting light weights, and stretching muscles she thought she had lost. Each task felt like another mountain, but she greeted them with a determined spirit. Still, not every day was filled with victory. Some mornings she woke up with aching legs so stiff she questioned whether she should even go to therapy. Some days she walked into the room feeling heavy and discouraged, and sometimes, despite her efforts, her body refused to cooperate. There was one day in particular when everything seemed to go wrong. She stumbled twice during warm-ups, couldn't finish a routine she had done easily before, and her legs cramped painfully during stretching. She felt defeated. At the end of the session, she sat on the chair, feeling more tired emotionally than physically. Mark sat across from her, watching quietly. "Rough day?" he asked. She nodded. "I feel like I'm going backwards." "You're not," he said calmly.
You're tired. That's different.
"It feels the same," she whispered. "No," he replied gently. "Going backwards means giving up. You're still fighting."
You're still showing up.
His words comforted her, but the frustration lingered. Recovery wasn't a straight line, and she knew it. Yet emotionally, the struggle felt heavier some days. She missed her old strength, her old freedom. She missed running with the horses, brushing their coats, speaking to them in the soft language only horse trainers understood. When she returned home that evening, she sat silently on her couch. She stared at the photograph of herself holding a young Mustang she once trained. She remembered how wild he had been at first, jumping, kicking, refusing the saddle, resisting every bit of guidance. But she had never given up on him. She saw his potential even when he didn't understand it himself. And now, she realized, she needed to show the same patience toward herself. The next morning she arrived at therapy with renewed determination, ready to face whatever challenge the day brought. Mark introduced a new exercise that involved stepping up onto a low platform and stepping down again with control. It was simple on paper, but incredibly demanding on weak muscles. Elena attempted the first step, and her body wobbled, but she steadied herself. The next step was better. The third one hurt, but she did it anyway. She repeated the motion over and over, pushing through the discomfort. After several minutes, Mark said, "Let's try the next level." He pointed to a slightly higher step. Elena felt unsure.
That one looks tall. You can try, he said softly. I'll be right here.
She lifted her foot and pushed upward. For a moment, she thought she wouldn't make it, but slowly, very slowly, she rose until she was standing on the higher step. Her breath caught. Her heart raced with excitement. She did it. Mark smiled. "Do you know how big that is?" She laughed breathlessly. "It feels big." "It is big," he said.
"It shows how far you've come." From that moment forward, Elena began seeing her progress more clearly. She realized that healing wasn't about perfect movements. It was about effort, consistency, and courage.
She started celebrating the smallest victories, understanding they were building blocks of something much larger. But the true breakthrough came during an exercise that tested not just her strength, but her balance and confidence. Mark brought her to a large mat placed on the floor. It was soft and slightly unstable, designed to challenge core strength and coordination. He asked her to walk across it while keeping her posture straight. The first attempt was difficult. Her feet sank slightly into the mat, making her movements uncertain. She felt unstable, but she kept going. She reached the end after several tense moments. "Again," Mark said. She walked back. "Now try with your eyes forward, not down," he instructed. Elena hesitated but lifted her chin. She walked again. This time she swayed more, but she managed to stay on her feet. "Good," Mark said. "Now let go of fear. Trust your body." She took a deep breath. She walked. Her steps became smoother, more controlled. She wasn't perfect, but she was balanced enough to feel proud. When she reached the end, she turned to Mark with bright eyes. "That felt different," she murmured. "That felt confident," he replied. Confidence, something she had lost after the accident, was returning, slowly but surely. After the mat exercise, Mark guided her to a mirror mounted on the wall. "Look at yourself," he said. She gazed at her reflection. She expected to see a tired, weakened version of her old self. Instead, she saw a woman standing tall, still healing, still growing, but undeniably stronger. "You're not the same woman who came here months ago," Mark told her. "You've rebuilt yourself piece by piece, and you still have more strength waiting to show." Elena felt her eyes warm with emotion. Deep inside she realized he was right. She had changed, not just physically but mentally. She learned patience, courage, resilience, and acceptance. She learned to rise again after falling. She learned to trust her body, even when it trembled. As the session ended, she slowly gathered her things. Her body was tired, but her heart felt light, full of hope. She thanked Mark, and he nodded with a gentle, proud expression. As she walked out of the building, she whispered to herself, "I'm stronger than a Mustang." And in that moment, she truly believed it. Her journey wasn't finished, but she had reached a point where the road ahead no longer looked impossible. She was ready for whatever came next. Because the strongest moments in life often come after the hardest battles, and Elena was finally stepping into her own strength again. Elena woke up early on the day that would mark a new chapter in her life. The sunlight entered her room like a soft, warm greeting. She stretched slowly, feeling a familiar ache in her legs, but the pain no longer scared her. It was a reminder of how far she had come, of the battles she had fought, and of the strength she had created inside herself. She sat at the edge of her bed for a moment, breathing deeply, letting gratitude fill her chest. Months earlier, simply standing up felt like an impossible dream. Now she rose from her bed with steady balance, her feet firmly touching the wooden floor. She placed her hand on the dresser to steady herself, then walked toward the window to look outside. Fields stretched across the land, brightened by the morning light. She saw a few horses grazing near the fence, their tails swaying gently with each small breeze. She smiled softly. Horses had been part of her life, long before the accident. They had been part of her identity. Seeing them now didn't fill her with sadness the way it once did. It filled her with courage. She whispered the words that had become her personal promise. "I'm stronger than a Mustang." Today she wasn't going to therapy. Today was different. She was visiting the stables for the first time since the accident. She was nervous, excited, uncertain, and hopeful all at once. Her heart beat faster with each passing moment. She knew this visit would test her in ways no exercise or machine ever could. She dressed slowly, choosing comfortable jeans and a soft shirt. She braided her hair the way she used to when she worked with horses. It felt comforting, like connecting threads between her past and present. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the woman who had once felt broken. She saw a woman who had rebuilt herself with patience, hard work, tears, and faith. As she headed toward the stables, her steps were careful but confident. The gravel path crunched under her shoes. The familiar scent of hay and earth reached her before she even stepped into the barn. The sounds of horses shifting, breathing, and gently knocking against their stalls brought back a rush of memories. Memories that once hurt, but now felt warm. She paused at the entrance. For a moment she simply listened. The barn had always been a place of comfort, and now it felt like she was returning home after a long journey. A young stable worker named Lily noticed her and ran over with a bright smile. "Elena, you're back!" she exclaimed. Elena returned the smile. "It's good to be here." Lily hugged her gently, careful not to squeeze too tightly. "We've all missed you. The horses, too." "I've missed them," Elena said softly. She walked inside, letting the familiar peace settle over her. She brushed her fingers across the wooden stalls as she passed. Each horse inside had its own personality, some shy, some bold, some playful, some stubborn. But they all shared a quiet strength. One stall held a young mare named Willow, whom Elena had begun training before the accident. Willow recognized her immediately. The moment Elena approached, the mare lifted her head and moved closer, her soft breath brushing against Elena's hand. "Hey, girl," Elena whispered, gently stroking her. "Did you miss me?" Willow nickered in response, a sound that always warmed Elena's heart. She leaned her forehead gently against the mare's neck, feeling a wave of emotion wash through her. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't pain. It was gratitude, deep and overwhelming gratitude for being able to stand there again. After spending some time reconnecting with the horses, Elena stepped outside toward the empty training arena. It stretched across the open land surrounded by fences she had leaned on many times while coaching riders. The soft sand inside reminded her of countless hours spent teaching horses to trust, guiding them with patience and calmness. She walked to the center of the arena, feeling the sand shift beneath her shoes. She took a slow breath and looked around. It was so quiet, so peaceful, so full of memories. It was here that she had felt strongest. Here that she had felt most herself. She wasn't ready to ride again. Not yet, and maybe not for a long time. But standing in the arena felt like reclaiming a part of her soul. She closed her eyes, remembering the Mustangs she had worked with in the past. She remembered their wild energy. The way they would run in circles, unsure of her at first, scared, but wanting to understand. She remembered how she would speak softly to them, giving them space until they trusted her enough to come closer. It struck her then, standing in the warm sunlight, that she had gone through the same journey they once did. She had been frightened, uncertain, and wounded. She had pulled away from the world, but slowly, with patience and guidance, she learned to trust again. Trust her body, her strength, and her future. She opened her eyes and felt tears form, but they were gentle tears, tears of healing. Just then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Mark approaching the arena. He must have come to check on her, knowing this visit meant more than simple nostalgia. Elena smiled. "I didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to make sure you were okay," he said with a kind look. "Coming back here, it's a big step." She nodded. "It is?" He stepped closer, his hands in his pockets, giving her enough space to breathe.
"How do you feel?" Elena looked around the arena one more time before answering.
"I feel whole," she said softly. "For the first time since the accident." "That's a big thing to feel," he replied. "It is," she said. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this again." Mark smiled slightly. "I always believed you would. You just needed time." They both stood quietly for a moment, listening to the wind brush across the field. Elena felt calm, deeply calm. It was a feeling she never thought she'd find again. She turned to him and said, "You know, when you told me I was stronger than a Mustang, it changed everything."
I could see the strength in you, Mark said gently.
Sometimes people need someone else to remind them of who they are. I didn't believe it at first, she admitted, but now...
I do, and that, he said, is the real strength. She smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek.
Thank you, not just for the exercises, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself.
You did all the hard work, he replied.
I only showed you what was already inside you.
Elena took a slow breath and looked back at the stable. She heard the horses moving inside, and it made her heart feel full.
She wasn't the same person she used to be. She wasn't as fast, or as strong, or as fearless physically. But she had gained something deeper, a quiet, steady resilience that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Mark, she said suddenly, I want to help others. The way you helped me. He raised an eyebrow. Help others? Yes, she said with growing confidence. People who are struggling. People who feel broken or scared. People who think they can't get better. I want to show them they can. He smiled, seeing the bright purpose in her eyes. That sounds perfect for you. I don't know exactly how yet, she continued, but I know I want to do it.
I want to give people hope, the way you gave it to me.
Mark nodded graciously. You'd be amazing at that. Your journey is inspiring. Elena looked out at the field again, imagining the future. She could see herself guiding others, encouraging them, reminding them that healing wasn't a straight line, and that every small step mattered. She could see herself using both her heart and her experience to help people rise again. Maybe she wouldn't train horses the same way she used to, but she could train people to believe in themselves, to stay patient, to stay strong, to trust their own progress. She could build new dreams from the pieces of her old ones, and she felt ready. As she walked back toward the stable with Mark beside her, she felt the ground steady beneath her feet. Her body was still healing, but her spirit was already standing tall. Later that day, she sat on her porch again, watching the sky change colors as the sun began to set. The world around her felt peaceful. The breeze carried the scent of the stables, and the soft sound of horses drifted across the fields. She wrapped her arms around herself gently, filled with warmth, comfort, and pride. Her life hadn't returned to what it once was. It had grown into something new, something stronger, something wiser, something more beautiful than she ever expected. She whispered one last time with a smile forming on her face, I'm stronger than a Mustang. And this time, the words didn't feel like encouragement. They felt like the truth. Her story of pain had become a story of courage. Her story of loss had become a story of growth. Her story of healing had become a story of strength, and she was ready to share that strength with the world.